What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. You hear those horns, you know we're about to drop all kinds of intel on your ear holes coming out of a joint practice between the Patriots and the Commanders. Highly entertaining day of football. And boy, was there a lot of football going on. Rubbernecking between one field and the next. Watching Jayden Daniels go against the Patriots defense, watching Drake Maye go against the Commanders defense. And all in all, if you had to come away with a takeaway, the takeaway would be this. The Patriots belonged. And that is meaningful. This is a team in Washington that just made the conference championship game. And I understand that is due in large part to a receiver for them who was not on the field on Wednesday in Terry McLaurin. I understand one of the reasons they were able to make that NFC championship game is they have a quarterback who is so dynamic, so electric with his legs. And a practice setting like the one we just saw on the fields behind Gillette Stadium is not necessarily one where even somebody as athletic as Jayden Daniels is necessarily going to be pushing the envelope when it comes to scrambling out of the pocket. I get it. They're not really built to be a practice team, especially without McLaurin right now. The Commanders are. But the Patriots belonged. Drake Maye went throw for throw with the guy who was Rookie of the Year last year, had one of the best rookie seasons we have seen at that position. Patriots defense handled a Commanders offensive line. The Patriots secondary held their own against Jayden Daniels in that passing game, especially in a critical situation. Late in the practice, red zone, time winding down on the clock, backup cornerbacks in the game. They show up. They keep the Commanders out of the end zone. The Patriots belonged. Does it mean they're making a conference championship game anytime soon? No, it doesn't. Does it mean they're winning the division? Does it mean they're going to a Super Bowl? No. That's not what we're saying. Let's be clear here. But there has to be some level of optimism because this team is, in my opinion, showing signs of growth. Certainly when you zoom out and you take a big picture view of things. But even from the start of camp until now, on both sides of the ball, and we're going to get into it today on Next Pats, we are going to talk about, in my opinion, the connection that drove the Patriots offense in this joint practice and could be the driving force behind the success that the Patriots have in 2025 on that side of the ball. That's that connection between Drake Maye and Pop Douglas. We're going to hear from both of those guys on the podcast here today. We're also going to talk about slot usage in general. We're going to really drill down on how Josh McDaniels might be using Pop Douglas and how productive that marriage can be. Is Pop Douglas the kind of slot who can succeed at a high level in today's NFL? We have some numbers to paint a picture for you. We're also going to give you a quick thought on every single position group based on what we saw in those joint practices. They are as valuable as it comes when it comes to practice time and our ability to lay eyes on the New England Patriots and what they're doing in those settings. It's why you had thousands of people there yesterday. Yes, they want to see the star power. Yes, they'd love to see Jason Tatum out in the wild, soaking it all in. John Bon Jovi's there. Patriots alumni all over the place. There was buzz. But one of the reasons it's a great time to go, if you are a true football diehard, is because this is a time to gauge what you have. Whether you're Mike Vrabel or whether you're Joe Fan on the metal bleachers or under a tree somewhere. So we're going to give you a thought on every single position group, and then we're going to take some questions. We're going to fire through. We're going to do a lightning round sort of mailbag. We got tons of questions. People are buzzing. The people are excited about this football team right now, so we'll get through as many questions as we can. But first, I want to start with Douglas and Maye. Pop Douglas was Drake Maye's favorite target on Wednesday, and you could see why. He was open all day. And to me, it's meaningful because the guy he was going against is, in my opinion, a very good player. And he's on his way to being even better than that. And that's Mikey Sanders still out of Michigan. We talked about him here on the podcast. He's from the area, grows up in Boston, goes to Everett High, great career at Michigan, really good rookie year in Washington. Freak athlete, love his demeanor, love his willingness to play a physical brand of football despite being relatively undersized. He's Washington's slot guy. And I thought Pop Douglas was open all day despite matching up with a guy that I think is a really good player. And to me, his athleticism, Douglas's athleticism, stands out. He is so difficult to cover in tight spaces. And you could understand why Drake Maye wants to go to him as frequently as he did. 5 targets in team periods. Pop Douglas did have a rare drop for him early in the practice, but anytime there was even a whiff of danger in the pocket for Drake Maye, you could see him escape pressure, step up in the pocket, find Pop Douglas across the middle. Rolling out, little sidearm delivery. Guess who? Pop Douglas streaking back across the field. To me, he could be incredibly valuable to this offense. He could be their chain mover. If it's not Drake Maye and his legs, it could be Drake Maye using his legs to buy himself time to allow an athlete like Pop Douglas to uncover. And that's how the Patriots end up putting points on the board in 2025. I've said it before. I'll say it again. In my opinion, he will be their most productive receiver in 2025. It won't be Steph Diggs. That's the bigger name. That's the longer resume. That's the Hall of Fame level player that's on the roster right now. I just don't think he's at that level right now. He's in his 30s. He's coming off a torn ACL. We'll see how it looks. I thought he was fine in the practice on Wednesday, and it is worth noting he was a late arrival. So did some asking around, found out that was the plan. The team had planned. Diggs and the team had planned ahead of time. He was going to stay out of the early portion of practice. They wanted to limit his reps. They have been managing all kinds of veterans over the course of this camp, whether you're Morgan Moses or Carlton Davis or Christian Barmore. Stephon Diggs is on that list as well. And so he had the early portion of practice off. As soon as he was back and he was active, he was right in the 7-on-7 drills, and Drake Maye was peppering him with targets. I think he looks fine. He does not look as dynamic as somebody like Pop Douglas. And we'll see how he progresses. Again, he's still relatively close to that surgery that repaired his torn ACL from last season. So could he get quicker? Could he get more dynamic? Could he show a little bit more vertical speed at some point in time? Maybe. We just haven't seen it yet. To me, Douglas is the kind of guy where you can see real upside. And yes, he was their leading receiver last year, but there's more there to draw out of him. And I would direct you back to podcasts I can remember doing in Indianapolis at the Combine. I can remember talking to sources across the league, opposing coaches, opposing scouts, front office people who have studied the Patriots and their roster very closely. And the prevailing thought in terms of how do they draw more out of this offense was, why the hell were they not using Pop Douglas more? And I think at times last year it was because there was some miscommunication. If you remember, there's an interception late in the game against the Chargers. Patriots are trying to make a comeback. Drake Maye, target deep over the middle of the field. Pop Douglas sort of in the vicinity, but not really. Alex Van Pelt, offensive coordinator at the time, says after the fact, Pop messed up the route. Credit Alex Van Pelt for being as frank as he was with us last year. But that was his explanation, was the receiver let the quarterback down in that instance. Not what you're looking for. And if it was Tom Brady who was playing quarterback here at the time, maybe Pop Douglas is somewhere else in 2025. I mean, it felt that way, right, when Brady was here. And if you didn't do the right thing and it led to a turnover, boy, that would break any trust that you might have built up with the greatest quarterback of all time prior to that. But Drake Maye clearly trusts Pop Douglas. And Pop Douglas clearly looks like he knows where he's going. I haven't seen a single instance of a pre-snap, oh, I'm in the wrong spot, I better get somewhere else. We haven't seen a single target go in his direction. And maybe there have been a few in general. I can't remember many at all. And this is a credit to everyone that's playing with that top unit offensively. One of those targets where it's just a clear miscommunication. One guy goes one direction, the football goes in the other. You almost wonder if there's an intentional grounding kind of penalty coming because there's just nobody within 10 yards of the football. Clear miscommunication. We haven't seen that. That did happen in that 4-interception practice during OTAs for Drake Maye, but since in training camp, I can't recall an instance of that happening. Pop Douglas spoke to why those types of things aren't happening after Wednesday's practice, after his big day against the Commanders. Here's what he had to say.
Drake was doing an interview and he just said, hey, you're lining up in the right places, you're running the right routes this year. What do you attest that growth to your mentor?
Man, getting in that book, man, and, I feel like that drive for me, being tired of losing, that is coming apart. And I feel like a lot of these people on our team too, tired of losing too. Some been on the winning team, Super Bowl, but they love winning, and I love winning too. So I want to get to it.
Antonio Gibson mentioned the importance of details with Josh McDaniels' offense. I'm curious, what are some of those details that he harps on that helped you? Because clearly it feels like you're further ahead than you.
Yeah, really knowing your position, knowing what you're supposed to do, and as you learn to do that, man, you got to learn your details, techniques, and fundamentals. And as you do that, I mean, you most likely gonna be open. It's crazy, but it's true.
It's crazy, but it's true. Credit to McDaniels. You know, if he's got guys believing in him and his system and understanding that if they are on their details, they're going to come open, that could go a long way, because we know, as dynamic as Pop Douglas is, he's really nobody's idea of a true number one wide receiver, of a true mano-a-mano. I'm going to line up across from anyone in the NFL, and I'm going to win. They don't have that guy. It's not Diggs. It's probably not Douglas. It's not Kayshon Boutte. It's not Mack Hollins. It's not Kyle Williams. So how are they going to generate explosive plays here? Well, Drake Maye is going to help. If he can extend plays and you get those playground-style plays, or you get that fast break football that the Patriots have talked about over the course of camp, scramble drill such situation, and guys get vertical that way, that's one way. The other way is believing in the system and staying true to your routes and understanding the fine granular details that Josh McDaniels is going to expect of you as a wide receiver and, of course, as a quarterback. But that wide receiver portion of the equation in the Josh McDaniels offense, we know, has been difficult for some guys in the past. It seems like Pop Douglas is picking up on it. That could mean really big things for him in this offense, and his quarterback is noticing that he's up on his details. I found it interesting that when asked about Kayshon Boutte, who had another good practice, by the way, against the Commanders, caught a nice back shoulder throw against Marshawn Lattimore, 4-time Pro Bowler, not what he was at that cornerback position, but certainly a starting level player at that position. Nice back shoulder touchdown from Drake Maye for Kayshon Boutte. Maye was asked about Boutte, and he brings the answer back to Pop Douglas. He was asked later in the press conference about Pop Douglas again, and he had incredibly complimentary things about his Spitfire wideout. Here's Drake Maye.
Yeah, coach keeps saying you do the right thing, keep doing it over and over, and you willing to block in the run game, and I can trust you. You're going to be out there, and I think there's a bunch of guys that are making things like that happen. Pop's doing a great job, and different guys in the room. So it's comforting knowing that you're going to be in the right spot, and it's my job to give him a chance. Yeah, I mean Pop. I think he's tough to guard. Like I said, I think you see it on little crossing routes and little quick moves when he's meeting a defender, face to face. So I think kind of all year, it's going to be our job to try to get him open in space and let him run with the football.
So exactly how productive could Pop Douglas be in this Patriots offense? Right? We're pumping him up, we're hyping him up, but what are we talking about here when we're talking about Pop Douglas and Josh McDaniels, Pop Douglas and Drake Maye? First, let's just remind you of how much of a slot supportive offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels can be. In 2021, last time Josh McDaniels was here, Jakobi Meyers leads the team in targets, 66% of his time in the slot. 2020, Meyers, 60% of his time in the slot, led the team in targets. Edelman, 2019, 67% of his time in the slot, led the team in targets. 2018, it was actually James White who led the team in targets that year. But Edelman was second with 105, 2/3 of his time in the slot. Edelman was hurt in 2017, so Cooks and Gronk, Brandon Cooks and Rob Gronkowski were your team leaders in targets. But Danny Amendola fills in for Edelman essentially. 80 targets, 81% of his time in the slot. Edelman in 2016 led the team in targets once again, over half his time in the slot. 2015, Edelman got hurt that year, if you remember. So you combine his targets and Amendola's, 165 targets between those two guys. Edelman over half his time in the slot, Amendola closer to 80%. In 2014, Edelman and Gronk tie for the team lead in targets with 124. If you look at that's Amendola's second year. He had been banged up. In 2013, they were really trying to manage him. He ended up obviously becoming a big part of what they were doing very late in the season. Some big catches in that Super Bowl against the Seahawks. But they combined that year for 165 targets and a lot of slot targets there. Edelman over 40% of his time in the slot, and Amendola, once again, closer to 80% of his time in the slot. So we know Josh McDaniels knows how to use these guys. However, in 2025, and we've talked about this on the Next Pats podcast before, the run game is coming back, right? We're dialing back the clock to the 90s, it feels like, in some respects, because of what defenses are doing, because that's what they're allowing offenses to have, is the run game. Can a slot like Pop Douglas not only survive, but thrive? Because if you want to be a team that can run the football and be that style of offense, can your interior receiver be 5'8", 190 pounds? And 190 might be generous with Pop Douglas. I don't know. I haven't got him on the scale. But we know he's undersized. He's listed at 5'8", 192. Because if you look at it, some of the best receivers in the league currently are being used, and quite a bit, out of the slot. But a lot of them are big bodies. And a lot of them are thumpers, quite frankly. Or they at least have that willingness to thump when asked in the run game. Right? Jamar Chase led the league in receiving last year, over a third of the time in the slot. Drake London, he was fourth in receiving last year, almost 40% of his time in the slot. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we know what he does in the slot for the Lions. Over half his time is spent in the slot. He was fifth in receiving last year. CeeDee Lamb was eighth. Half his time is spent in the slot. Vlad McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba. These guys are well over 50%. You're talking 70% and above in the slot. Those guys are all top 10 receivers. 6 of your top 10 receivers in the NFL last year, heavy slot usage. And a lot of those guys are big bodies. There is one outlier there, and it's Ladd. And boy, he tore the Patriots' faces off last year. But even he is 6 feet. He's only 185, but he's 6 feet. And he's willing to block. If you watch him, he'll stick his nose right in there, get his feet moving, and no, he is not an earth-moving type, to say the least. But he can get in the way. And I think Pop Douglas could do that, but I'm really not sure. I don't think he was asked to do it all that much over the course of the last couple of years. And if he's playing a lot in the slot, if he's going to be their leading receiver, he's going to have to be willing to mix it up a little bit, is my guess for Josh McDaniels. I can tell you I've noticed him chipping on the edge. He's not afraid to do that. He'll earhole an outside linebacker or defensive end, and he's put a guy on the ground earlier this summer. I believe it was Keon White. He's given help to Will Campbell in an 11-on-11 period. Gave a much bigger human being a good shot. So maybe there's more of that to come for Pop Douglas, and you can see some of that willingness to be physical in the run game. And again, he's not going to be moving, you're going to be running behind him. But if he can hold up, now you're using him across situations. Now he's a 3-down player. Now you're giving him more targets. You're using him in some maybe more unpredictable ways. And that's how you become one of the more productive slot receivers in football. So maybe they can use the Ladd McConkey example as an example of a guy who's a little bit slighter, having all kinds of success in the slot. The other guy I like as a comp for Pop Douglas in terms of how you might be able to use him. I don't think he has this kind of vertical speed, but in terms of the frame and maybe how you use him, maybe there are some suggestions there for Josh McDaniels in 2025. And I'm talking about BC's own Zay Flowers in Baltimore, 5'9", 182. Very similar height weight. 112 targets last year, 1,059 yards, 38% of his time in the slot. Now, I think Pop Douglas is going to be way north of that in terms of the percentage you use him inside. But I think there could be some breadcrumbs left there by Baltimore last year in terms of getting a guy with that size, with that skill set, and making him one of the most productive players at his position. To me, if you want to be as explosive as possible, that means more targets to Pop Douglas. It might mean fewer targets for Stephon Diggs, who to me has operated almost solely in the short to intermediate area for the Patriots this summer. I said it on the Patriots Talk podcast. I haven't said it on this podcast. there was a day earlier this week, Patriots on Patriots, where Travion Henderson, the running back out of Ohio State, made 2 down the field, over the shoulder, explosive touchdown receptions. They both came in, I would say, about a 4-minute real-time span. In those 4 minutes, those 2 catches represent 2 more explosive down the field catches than Stephon Diggs has had all summer. So I just don't think they're planning on using him that way. I don't think that's his game really anymore. Whereas Pop Douglas in scramble drill situations, I remember watching Danny Amendola even on a wheel route. He wasn't beating anybody long, but if you can scheme things up the way Josh McDaniels has these guys believing he can scheme things up, Douglas has enough in the way of speed and the ability to track the football that you could use him down the field occasionally. That's not going to be his bread and butter, but you could do it. And again, maybe there are some clues there in Baltimore as to how that might happen. Baltimore, by the way, a team that obviously loves to run the football, comfortable having a 5'9", 182 guy running around out there playing almost 40% of his plays in the slot. So it can be done. And that would be the guy that I'm watching to make sure that we're doing everything possible to get the most out of the guy that, in my opinion, and I think it should be in their opinion, is their most physically gifted receiver, even if he is only 5'8", 192, because he showed it against the Commanders. He's that guy in this offense. All right, let's get to some thoughts on every single position. We're going to fire through these quickly. At quarterback, Drake Maye. What was the takeaway for me from Drake Maye's performance against the Commanders this week? Boy, does he have control at the line of scrimmage. We watched him under center, alert the play. Usually that means you're going to the second play that's called in the huddle for Josh McDaniels' offense. Go from an under center look to a shotgun look and execute. We saw him using other hand signals, changing the play at the line of scrimmage or changing routes at the line of scrimmage, maybe changing protections, and execute. And he was doing this consistently. A lot of communication at the line of scrimmage before that Kayshon Boutte back shoulder touchdown against Marshawn Lattimore. He looks to be in control in an offense that has a lot of its quarterbacks. One of the reasons their coaching staff was as impressed with Mac Jones as they were in 2021 was not because of anything he could do physically. It was because they felt like they were running the Tom Brady offense. Not the breadth of it, not the full thing, but in terms of the control at the line and the ability to get into the right play and to have some answers. Maybe not all the answers to the test the way Brady did, but to have answers to certain defensive looks. They had a guy they felt like could get them into the right play at a moment's notice. It looks like Drake Maye can do something similar. That, to me, is the primary takeaway because he looked really, really good. I had him as 14 for 19 in the 11-on-11 drills, 3 sacks, a couple of those off backup and third-string right tackles in DeMontre Jacobs and Marcus Bryant. Morgan Moses didn't play. And 2 of those incompletions in 11-on-11 periods were drops, one by Pop Douglas and one by Travion Henderson, who had a difficult practice, had a couple drops actually on the day, uncharacteristic for him. I'm still very high on him. At running back, let's get into that running back conversation. The takeaway for me, Travion Henderson's their most dynamic back. To me, he should be their lead back. Will he be? I don't know. Josh McDaniels tends to usually like to have the big back, the LeGarrette Blount type, and then your more undersized guys that are a little bit more of the do-it-all variety. I think Henderson is so dynamic, you should be using him as often as you can, even after a practice where he just had a couple drops. You're going to have those hiccups. He's a rookie, but he already can bring it in pass protection. That's what sparked the scuffle that got Mike Vrabel bloodied on Wednesday. Henderson, to me, should be their most frequently used back in 2025. At wide receiver, here's the takeaway for me. After Pop Douglas, Mack Hollins was the most popular receiver. In fact, he had just as many targets as Pop Douglas. So over the breadth of the practice, I focused on Douglas first because early in the practice, boy, he was being peppered with targets, and it felt like anytime Drake Maye was in any kind of trouble, he was looking for number 3. But Mack Hollins, number 13, 5 targets and 11-on-11 periods. And what a day he had. Beautiful one-handed catch down the sideline with Josh Dobbs dropping it in the bucket. I thought one of Drake Maye's best plays of the day. He's rolling right like a shortstop, sidearm throw as he's rolling to the right sideline. Who's coming across the back end line? It's Mack Hollins. Hits him right in the hands as he's making his way to the back corner of the end zone. Really good day for Mack Hollins. He's going to have a role in this offense, friends. Period, point blank. And if he's trending up, I would say the receiver who therefore has to be trending down would be Kyle Williams. Kyle Williams flashed early, saw some of that speed down the field. It felt like Drake Maye, even after a bad play for Williams, still trusted him enough to loft him up another. We have heard very little from Kyle Williams over the course of the last few practices since Mack Hollins' return. Mack Hollins looks like that guy on the outside that they want. Big body, 6'4", understands the offense, has been with Josh McDaniels before. He's a pro's pro. He's already, my understanding is, a leader in that room. He's been the guy who's been getting a lot of work with the ones, and Kyle Williams has not. Now, Kyle Williams is still going to make this roster. He's a third-round pick. He's got real ability. We know that. But I would temper my expectations for Kyle Williams' impact early in 2025 because Mack Hollins looks like they're planning on him maybe being a starter and being at least in the top 4. Diggs, Douglas, Booty, Hollins. To me, those are your top 4 right now. And Kyle Williams is going to make the roster as your 5th. The question is, do you keep a 6th? At tight end, Jack Westover playing a lot of fullback. Just keep that in mind. Brock Lampy, our guy here on the Expats podcast. I don't know of any other podcast that is having segments with a former Northern Illinois coach and James White talking about the fullback and Josh McDaniels' offense and how they're going to use this guy and he's undrafted rookie and boy, he's going to make the roster. We were talking about this months ago. He's on IR. You feel for the guy because it was basically right at the jump of camp. And I don't even know if we mentioned it in our last episode. But Jack Westover, out of Washington, young player, tight end. They keep throwing him out there at fullback, so they must like what they see in terms of his willingness to stick his nose in there. It takes a certain kind of mentality. Thomas Brown, the tight ends coach, was telling us that all the way back in the spring. He said he couldn't wait to see guys wearing the pads and the contact to ramp up because that's when you find out who can actually play that role because it takes a certain kind of guy. And they must feel like Jack Westover has that. So just a name to keep in mind when you're doing your own 53-man roster projections at home. On the offensive line, all kinds of right tackle shuffling. You just mentioned that. Morgan Moses out. All kinds of center shuffling. Garrett Bradbury out, Ben Brown in. At times, to me, with Ben Brown working at guard recently in camp, he feels like that super flex interior offensive lineman more so than Cole Strange does. Could they keep both? They could. But right now, I would give Ben Brown the edge in terms of the value he's bringing to the team as a backup offensive lineman. You want your interior guy to be able to play all 3 if you could. So if they're already trying Ben Brown at guard, I guess the question is, do you feel better about the guy who's got more experience at guard or the guy who's got more experience at center? One guy's a former first-round pick. One guy isn't. Does that factor into the decision? I don't know. But center can be such a technical spot, I would think, especially with a veteran like Garrett Bradbury, who's already missed some time this summer. You would want somebody who's really comfortable in the middle. And I don't know if Cole Strange is there quite yet. So let's keep an eye on Ben Brown v. Cole Strange as a camp battle. He's just so thin across the board there. Will Campbell, let's talk about him very quickly during that Commanders practice. I had him as basically 1-1-1 based on things that I've been told since the practice ended. I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't watching the Patriots offensive line. It was as far away on the practice field as you could be from the media and still be on the practice field. The Patriots offensive line versus the Commanders defensive line. So did not have a great view of it. Tom Curran, God bless him, did all he could to see what was going on there. I think it was really difficult. But he did a good job. Talked to some other people involved in the practice after the fact, and they felt like, I think 1-1-1 is probably a fair assessment of Will Campbell and his performance. So mixed bag, as it has been for Will Campbell. I thought 11 on 11 is the same thing. I thought early in the practice, 11 on 11, I thought he was strong. As the practice went on, some speed to power I thought was difficult for him. Then you started to see that edge get maybe a little bit softer with some just true speed around the corner. So a couple pressures is what I had him for late in the 11 on 11s. It wasn't completely chaotic, and to me, I still believe he's going to give you representative tackle play. Not top 10 tackle play probably, but representative tackle play in 2025. Special teams, I'll even give you a special teams nugget. Andy Borregales 4 for 4. He's coming on strong after a pretty slow start to camp and a lot of drawing of the football. I wonder how much they've tried to work on his footwork to make sure that you're getting a little less horizontal movement on those kicks, because he seems to be kicking it really true of late. Good job by him. Defensive line, Christian Barmore, to me, had his best practice of the summer. I had him for a sack in 11 on 11s. I watched him dominate in the one-on-one period of practice, and the Commanders are missing some people on their offensive line, but they couldn't handle him, especially in the early portion of practice. Great day for him. On the edge, Harold Landry. You haven't heard that name, much, at least for me, during training camp. And I don't know if you've heard it much from other people, but he stood out. I had him for a sack early in the practice, and on the play before, I had him for a pressure, just blowing up a running back in pass protection, trying to handle the edge, and he just couldn't do it. Harold Landry flying off the edge with a lot of speed. There were some problems in terms of setting the edge for the Patriots, I thought, on both sides of the line of scrimmage. So against the run, especially against an athletic quarterback, you see some of those zone read types of runs. It's all well and good to be aggressive, but if you're flying downhill and you're going against a fast quarterback like Jane Daniels, he's just going to pull that football out of the running back's belly and run right around you. So I think they're going to have to figure that out up front. I still wonder about how they look against the run, and I feel that way. This is my linebacker takeaway. They just feel light to me against the run. Jack Gimmons, Robert Spillane, I just, even the defensive tackles contribute to that feeling that I have of them being a little bit light. So again, running's back. They're going to see some teams that run the football really well. How do they handle it? That's the question to me defensively, because I think this could be a really good unit, especially when their corners come back. Corner thought, Alex Austin. Great finish to practice. In the red zone, pass breakup on 4th down, clock winding down, right there in coverage, basically forces a throw out of the end zone on 3rd down from Jaden Daniels. With Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis out, Alex Austin, mentioned how the Patriots look like they belong with a team that was a really good football team last year. Alex Austin does not look like a backup. So I thought for that position group, that was the takeaway. They're lucky to have a guy like him as their third, especially when their second, Carlton Davis, is a guy who's missed a lot of time in recent years. And at safety, not a lot to take away from this particular practice, but what I would say is this, because we've talked about him a lot on the Patriots Talk Pod and Early Edition elsewhere. Kyle Duggar, I think, is going to be here. I think he's too difficult to move based on the finances and based on what he's been committed. I think he's too difficult to trade. I don't know who's trading for him on the current contract that he's on. So I think you just have to hope, if you're the Patriots, that he gets fully healthy. I'm just wondering how much of what we're seeing or not seeing from him is based on the injury he dealt with last year. Really slowed by it. He was still slowed and limited in the spring. He's such a dynamic athlete. I think the other thing that we kind of forget sometimes is he's a little older than you might expect based on when he came into the league, but he was an older rookie just because he was a late bloomer. It's the reason why he ended up at Lenore-Rhyne, but he's 29. He'll be 30 early next offseason in March. So he's maybe a little longer in the tooth than you might think. You still maybe think of him as a relatively young player, but I think between that and the injury, it just feels like a guy who's still trying to get his feet underneath him. All right, let's take a few mailbag questions here. We got so many. We're going to hit you with a written bag before the preseason game on Friday night. Just want to let people know, if they're interested, if you listen to the podcast and you want to hear the soothing sounds of my voice during the football game, I will be alongside Bob Sosi on 98.5 The Sports Hub, Patriots Radio Network, doing the color commentary for the game. Very excited to do that. Got a chance to do it for 2 of the 3 preseason games. Last year, we'll be doing the same thing this year, so we'll do this game with Bob, and then the Vikings game with Bob out in Minnesota, and then Zoe is back. He's doing TV for the first 2 games. He's back to do radio for the preseason finale and obviously for the regular season. So we'll get a couple games in. We'll do some color, have some fun, sort of flying by the seat of my pants. Not anything that I had ever done before last summer, but had a blast. Bob is the ultimate pro. It held my hand throughout, and so made it very easy for me to just sit up there and talk ball and tell you what I saw and maybe why I saw what I saw. So had a lot of fun doing that. It gives me a chance, too, to sort of allow my reporting to come through on the game broadcast. And so I can let you in on some of the things that I've heard about certain players, maybe players that, we're not talking a whole lot about. The Elijah Ponders of the world, who, by the way, has had a really good camp and I think might make the roster on the edge. A name to keep an eye on, undrafted rookie out of Cal Poly. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to be spending your Friday night watching some football, go ahead and listen to us on the radio. Maybe you're traveling, driving down the Cape, driving up to Maye. Who knows what you're doing? Throw us on the radio. We'd really appreciate it. All right, to the questions. Claire Cooper, Classy Claire. Great to see her this week. Ultimate podcast extraordinaire across the pond, made it over to Foxborough. Fantastic to see her. She asks, is the wide receiver spot the biggest competition right now, or is there a position battle that's flying a little under the radar? I would look at the offensive line and its depth on the offensive line. I think they know their top 5. Who's the backup interior guy? Ben Brown, Cole Strange. Who's the backup tackle? And I know there's some questions here as well about the backup. Who's that swing tackle? Is it DeMontre Jacobs? I think that's probably the way they would lean right now. Marcus Bryant hasn't wrestled that job away from him. And tackle in particular, I don't know how much I'd be playing either Will Campbell or Morgan Moses this preseason, because if either of those guys goes down, I think you've got real problems. Bug Out Dad asks, does Will Campbell look serviceable? Does it look like Drake Maye will take the year 2 leap? What does a realistic record look like for the Patriots this year? All right, that's 3 questions in one, Bug Out Dad. I guess there are no rules, so good for you taking advantage of the character limit there on Twitter. I do think Will Campbell looks serviceable. Talked about that earlier. I do think Drake Maye will take a leap in large part due to the offense that he is now in and the influence with Josh McDaniels and that ability to get into the right play and just the confidence that he's shown, in my opinion, the poise that he's shown in his second year that I think only comes with experience, that's going to allow him to create even more than he did last year and maybe find some explosive plays that you wouldn't think would be there just based on their personnel. Realistic record to me still, I've got him still at 9 wins. I'm not moving up to 10. I'm not moving up to 11 based on how they played in a joint practice or how they've performed to this point this season. They're right around where I thought they would be, so I'm going to keep them right at 9. Justin Trombino says, I've been curious to know why Troy Brown isn't with New England anymore. He's with the Giants. He's on the Giants coaching staff. I think he would work well with Josh McDaniels, but he was part of that Mayo staff, and obviously, for the most part, other than a couple of names, those guys have moved on. So he's with the Giants, and I'm sure he's helping out those young players, those receivers in particular, in New York. Dave Del Rio says, who's going to be the place kicker? I'm going to lean Andy Borregales. I did have Parker Romo on my most recent 53-man roster projection. I just felt like he was more consistent in the ball flight. Again, what do I know? I'm not a kicking expert. There was not nearly as much horizontal movement from Romo early in camp, but Borregales was drafted. He's made all his kicks lately. It's really hard not to look at Borregales and say he's going to be the guy. Okay, Sean asks, is the 24 draft class that much worse than the 25 draft class? Or are they getting more chances because they were drafted by this regime? In other words, Vrabel and co. have more incentive for the 2025 class to look good, so they're getting more chances. Wolf blamed 24 picks on coaching. It's a good question, Sean. I think when the 2024 class shows as poorly as it did against NFL competition a year ago, there's no reason to commit more time to those guys. You've invested real draft capital in Travion Henderson, Will Campbell, obviously, Kyle Williams, Jared Wilson. So that to me is number one. They don't have unfortunately for the 2024 class, they don't have the negative resume that some of those players do. So that helps them. They've also, just played better this summer. Like Jared Wilson, for stretches, has been their best offensive lineman, period. Will Campbell has been the only guy who looks like he can block anyone on the left side. There's no reason to look at Caden Wallace, for instance, from last year's draft class and say, well, we got to get a look at him at left tackle. He hasn't given you any reason to do that. And he's also banged up right now, and they're playing him inside. Javon Baker is one guy who surprised me a little bit from that 2024 class because he does feel like he makes a play a day. Now, for the most part, he's working with Josh Dobbs. He's worked a little bit, just a sprinkling of work with Drake Maye and the first-team offense. And so if they keep 6, he might be the 6th because he does give them a little something that others don't. Jalen Polk, his skill set to me, it sort of overlaps with, Mack Hollins, a little bit. I think it maybe overlaps with Steph Diggs a little bit. Sort of a short to intermediate guy, route runner, can do a little bit of everything. Maybe, like the idea of Jalen Polk is that he can do a little bit of everything, but he hasn't shown that, and he hasn't had a good camp. I am not going to get excited about one-on-one performance. I'm not going to get excited about 7-on-7 performance until you're with the top group, until the coaching staff feels as though you're worthy of being with the top group, and until you show that you can produce against real defenders in 11-on-11 situations. I don't know why they would hold a roster spot for you. So what that means for Jalen Polk, I'm not sure. But Javon Baker, to me, I would put on a rung up the ladder ahead of Polk. And if they did keep 6, I think Baker would certainly be in that conversation. Kendrick Bourne, can he get back healthy? He's in that conversation. Efton Chisholm, can he show out? Can he tear it up to a point in preseason where if they were to release him, another team somewhere else in the NFL would scoop him up in a heartbeat? And so if they don't want that to happen, they just want him in the program and they want him to develop here in Foxborough, do you reserve a spot for him? Like, these are conversations that will be had as the summer progresses. Okay, let's do 2 more. We got one from our buddy Seti and Ari. Hi, Phil. Is Drake's interceptions coming at the end of game situations any cause for alarm? This is an interesting question because in the scrimmage they had last week, throws a pick to end the game to Alex Austin. Again, having a great camp. And then in the red zone period against the Commanders on Wednesday, they're moving. They're clock's ticking down. He's got a wide open Pop Douglas for a touchdown to sort of finish off the day, put an exclamation point on what had been a very good day for Drake Maye in that offense. Ball gets tipped by Bobby Wagner and picked by Mikey Sanderstill. I'm not going to say it's not cause for concern. It happened last year. It's happened now a couple times this summer. What I would say is I think part of what makes Drake Maye is that he has ultimate confidence in his arm and in his physical ability. And even in the things that he's reading, whether he should or not. And I like that about Drake Maye. I think that allows him to make some next level types of plays that other guys might not be willing to make because they don't want to take that risk, because they don't have as much confidence as he does. Should that be dialed back, or can it be reined in, or is there a way to channel it in a different way in these late game situations? I do think it's a conversation worth having, because Bobby Wagner makes a great play on Wednesday. But if that's a real game, and that's the difference between winning and losing, we're all going to look at that play and say, well, if he was more experienced or if he was more on his details, he would have looked off the sort of roaming linebacker in the middle of the field there, or used his eyes, or done something differently to avoid that situation. Because once you get a tip ball down in the red zone, everything's so condensed. Everybody knows the ball's usually coming out pretty quickly. That's ripe for a disaster, that kind of situation. So I think it's a fair question. So cause for concern, cause for alarm, capital A alarm. I'm not there yet, but I think there's something about being a little bit more careful in these late game situations that is going to have to become part of his game. And we'll see. It's hard to know until the games actually matter. Okay, let's go with Kyle Marsden with the last question. And again, I'm going to try to write some of these up for everybody that chipped in with a question. Thank you. He asks, are there any surprising players that have popped or surprising duds so far in camp? I'm putting Kayshon Boutte at the top of the list in terms of surprises. I'm sorry. He's been one of their most consistent receivers. You could argue he's been the most consistent receiver on the team. That's a surprise to me. I would put Javon Baker in the little bit lower category of surprises, but at that same position. So he's top of mind. I'm going to put Kobe Minor, Mr. Irrelevant, on my list of relatively surprising players, because I've seen now in the last 3 practices, I've seen him get his hands on the football a couple of different times, and so he just sort of seems to be around the ball and have a little bit of a nose for the ball. And so he's popped to me. Josh Farmer has popped to me at times when he's been out there. He has missed some time, but he was out there against the Commanders, and I thought performed well in spurts. He's the rookie 4th-round pick out of Florida State, the defensive tackle. Surprising duds in camp. I have been surprised that Kendrick Bourne hasn't done much. Now, obviously, he's hurt, but even before he was hurt, he really wasn't working with the top offense at all. So that's a surprise to me, right? So sticking at that receiver position, which is one I know a lot of people want to hear about. The fact that we haven't seen more Morgan Moses has been a little surprising to me. I get what they're doing with him, and I understand if they were to lose him to injury in camp, that's a disaster based on what they have behind him at tackle. And he hasn't been a dud when he's been out there. It's just we haven't seen him all that consistently day in, day out. And so it's been a little bit more difficult to get like a true gauge of where he's at relative to some other guys. I would say Milton Williams. Let's talk about the big ticket items. Like, for a guy who's making as much money as he is, to me, he has not dominated practices to that level. And I didn't think he was one of the standout performers, again, against the Washington offensive line that was missing some guys. I didn't think he was that level dominant on the interior. I thought Barmore was clearly the more impactful guy. And I think over the course of camp, even in the one-on-ones against Patriots offensive linemen, he's had some good battles with Mike Onwenu, but his quickness and his explosiveness off the line, his athleticism versus Onwenu's power, I would think he would win more of those battles like decisively. He has won, and I don't want to act like he's done nothing. But in terms of performing to the expectations that come with his contract, I don't think he's met those. So let's see how that goes the rest of the summer. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. It's been a lot of yapping from yours, truly. I appreciate you sticking with us. Appreciate you sticking with all the intel we're trying to drop on you when it comes to that slot receiver position, what Josh McDaniels does with it, and how Pop Douglas might fit in the equation. Drake Maye and his absorption of the Josh McDaniels offense, that to me is an incredibly important storyline for the remainder of what the Patriots have this preseason in training camp leading up to their first game in September. There's so much to get to after a practice like that one between the Patriots and Commanders. Again, appreciate you sticking through all the way with us to the end. Keep an eye out for another edition of Next Pats. We'll have one certainly next week. Enjoy the preseason game Friday. Listen to us on the radio. If you could, watch us on early edition before the game. Look for the Patriots Talk podcast soon after the game, and we'll be right back with you on Monday. All of our regularly scheduled shows to talk all things Patriots with you. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you very soon.